Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you all over here the session for on which we are going to talk about on GTM 101 for B2B startups. I want to welcome our speaker Varun Choraria from Vymo. He is a senior associate in product marketing at Vymo. Varun Choraria is currently with a GTM product marketing function at Vymo, a Series B funded startup. He is also a student founder, having run his own creative agency for enterprises in core industries for a few years. He is also a popular speaker, author, and his work has been cited across the board. Additionally, he's also run a podcast focused on CHROs during the pandemic. So this is the brief about what our speaker has expertise in. So I would like everyone have here, and Varun, thank you so much for coming for this session. Over to you.
Great. Thanks a lot for the introduction. Can we just dive right in? Let me share my screen, and I think we can dive right in. Hey, can you confirm if you're able to see the deck on the screen?
Yes, Varun.
Cool. So in this session, I'm basically going to tell you guys what GTM 101 is and essentially how you can all sort or start beginning your 0 to 1, your 1 to 10 journeys while doing GTM, right? Regardless of whether you're running a B2B startup or a B2C startup. But of course, the inclination is going to be towards B2B because I'm from the B2B background, but I do have a couple of things for the B2C focuses here as well, right? So essentially, what does the GTM function or the GTM strategy essentially? What does that mean, right? So, go to market essentially think of it as a central function that does more of enablement and doesn't per se really own numbers, but we're the most strategic function that figures out your positioning, your messaging, who your users are, where your markets are, all those little aspects that really make or break your product lifecycle and everything else, right? So it's all about figuring out how quickly can you reach to your customers, how quickly can you make that scientific, and how quickly can you really make that snowball in terms of like great scale, right? So if I were to divide that activity or the set of activities into five different things, right, that would be the very first thing would be understanding your ideal customer profile, right? And verifying your product market fit as well. That what do I have product market fit? Do I have? Am I talking to the right person? Am I in the right space? Am I positioning myself right? All of those factors come at the first point, and then the second point comes in when you're trying to focus on increasing your top of the funnel, which is trying to increase your market qualified leads, your MQLs, right? And this is more relevant to the B2B case scenario because you're going to be doing a lot of account based marketing. And number three, you're going to have product led growth, which is basically figuring out how quickly can you enable self serve, how quickly can you enable various functions like that that could essentially just make the user go from a free plan to a paid plan all by himself, right? Then the fourth part is lower CAC. This lower CAC can sort of be clubbed with the fifth point, which is helping BDRs and SDRs. Essentially, it's more to do with sales enablement than anything else. And I will, of course, tell you more about this as we go along. So for the very first part, right, understanding your ICP and verifying PMF, right? So one of the things that I normally tend to use, right? So imagine that you've got a product idea, you've got a startup idea, and you really want to figure out, where do you want to start playing, where you're going to do, your initial marketing or initial customers, essentially all those little aspects, right? So the one way to quantify that would be to use a 3x3 product discovery framework, right? Well, essentially what that means is that if you look at the first bar alone, which is what the real problem needs to be solved, why is now the right time to solve the real problem, and how is it uniquely positioned in the sense, like let's say if I do decide to build a venture out of this, what's in it for me, how much profit can I make, how much revenue can I make, what's the total addressable market that I have, right? So all of these questions can essentially just be answered by that, right? So when you do that, you've got your market analysis and your competition analysis set. And one of the ways that you can sort of start going about this tactically is, let's say you get a Zoom info subscription or a LinkedIn Sales Navigator or any one of these tools, toolings that you've got there. You can just either take the free tier or buy the paid subscription. Key in a bunch of your company attributes. Let's say, for example, you're trying to target the first Fortune 500 companies or Fortune 1000 companies in the US that are, let's say, in the retail industry, for example, and you're trying to connect with all the senior stakeholders to validate your solution or to see how big the market actually is, right? So you would use tools like Zoom Info or tools like LinkedIn Sales Navigator that can really sort of help you figure out, what I've got 25 lakh people out there who could potentially use my tools. That's one way to go about it, right? The other way to go about it is that McKinsey and Company and a bunch of these consulting companies essentially have a lot of their own thought leadership research reports out there in the market itself. So you don't really have to start by reinventing the wheel all the time. You can just leverage their information and everything that they've done in that respect. For example, if let's say you're trying to build the next Facebook, right? You can actually go to McKinsey, BCG, PwC, any of these little consulting companies out there. You can actually go to one of these websites and just check out, what they have to say. What is their perspective on it for the next 5-10 years? What are the levers that they've identified that people will start building technologies upon, right? All of these questions can really be answered by doing a bunch of your reading. So I think when you're doing your due diligence initially to figure out your market analysis and competition, it's very important to just not just figure out what the theoretical aspects is in principle, but also to figure out at a rough number how many people can you really go out and reach out and talk to, and um, basically just deep dive into understand how their day in the life sort of is, right? Now to do competition analysis. Now, for example, let's say you've built an MVP of sorts or something, right? And you are trying to sort of figure out, who are my other competitors out there? What kind of features are they offering? All of these things, right? So you could leverage websites like Zero Crowd or Capterra and all these things where, for example, even Gartner has got something called the Magic Quadrant or the Gartner Hype Cycle that they normally have, right? Where they actually place a couple of competitors across the 4 quadrants, and then you can actually check out what the leaders and what the laggards and what the visionaries and everybody else are up to as well, right? So it's a good marketscaping exercise that you can do to sort of understand really what are they really trying to sell, how they're pricing their services. Are they offering a white label solution as well, or are they trying to rest all of their monies purely on white labeling? What exactly are they trying to do, right? So that's something that you can sort of leverage. Now when it comes to the solutioning part of it or anything else, now one of the things that I sort of believe in myself is that companies start and end at the balance sheet. So when you have figured out what are the actual balance sheet numbers that companies like Swiggy or any of the companies that that you're trying to become, right, are sort of trying to chase after. When you understand the numbers they're trying to chase after, which is GMV or could be gross margins or any of these numbers, right, you can sort of leverage those numbers to sort of start building out features that could in turn drive revenue to that numbers. Because what happens when you start building startups or when you start building products is that you land up building too many features for the wrong people, and none of them really correlate to your revenue outcomes. So I think when you start out your exercise, it's good to sort of have this framework or sort of a thing or a basic matrix even laid out that sort of just answers all of these three things at least to a good level. So at least when you start reaching out to people to talk to them, you're making a very educated guess about what sort of tools that they already have at their disposal, how much is there bandwidth in terms of how much money they can spend to a tool, etc., right? So let's dive deeper into that. So how do you verify PMF, for example, product market fit, right? There are two ways to do it. One way is that you can directly reach out to your customers, have a questionnaire prepared, probably offer them a gift card, meet them over a coffee shop or over a beer, and then figure out, these are the XYZ things that you need. This is what I'm building. You propose a solution, and then they like it, and then they give you their emotional opinion on it. And now that's something I'm not a big proponent of, because what happens is that you're essentially just looking out for validation, and when you look for validation, it doesn't really work out well for either the person who could potentially be using a solution versus you, right? So the other way is to sort of create this market map, and you can take a Google spreadsheet or anything to sort of just create this, right? So on the y-axis, you're going to have something called jobs. Now, so jobs could be technical for people who aren't into the product management space per se, but to give the general audience a fair idea what a job means, it essentially just implies, things that somebody's trying to achieve, right? If I want to, let's say, go to the airport from where I am right now, there are a couple of ways to do it. I could hire a cab, I could hire a bike, I could hire a Rapido, or I could hire a friend to do it for me. If you notice, I'm using the word hire because there could be a bunch of plausible solutions that I could leverage to achieve my goal of going to the airport. So if people are trying to evaluate your product, if they're trying to talk to you, right, they're essentially hiring you for a certain purpose. Which is why sometimes when you see a lot of SaaS companies, they eventually get into doing a lot of integrations, doing a lot of these things, because they're all trying to become the best solution that somebody can hire. Because you know what, if I'm embedded into a system better than anybody else out there, then you know what, I'm great for you, right? That's essentially the kind of card that most of them are trying to play. So if you look at the y-axis, right, so you've got jobs. Now, for example, I'm trying to, let's say, open a coffee shop, right? So why would I want to open a coffee shop? Because the pandemic is going on, the offices are closing. I could go to a coffee shop and get my work done, or I could get my meetings done, or I could just go for a date, or I could meet a couple of friends. I could meet a bunch of random new people. I could network. I could do all of these things, right there, which you're seeing in the x-axis. I'm sorry, the y-axis right there. So these are the various reasons why I could possibly go to a coffee shop to achieve a certain goal, right? So these could be my goals. Now let's look at the circumstances, which is where the context setting actually happens. Now, context setting is sort of super important because that sort of brings the ground reality closer. Like, for example, you could be building the best of the best solution, but if that solution, if the market itself isn't ready for it right now, then there's no point building on it at all. Because the moment you fundraise or the moment you set up shop, you're sort of liable to actually show returns and show profits and show revenues in the company, right? So the only closest way that you can do it is if you start building what's relevant now and what's probably could be relevant a year from now. So if you keep that horizon in front of you, I think that's a good thing to sort of proceed with. So if you look at the various circumstances, that I'm retired, I don't really have a place where I can go meet friends. Coffee shops could be a good place. So that's one use case where I could probably use coffee. If I'm single, don't really have a lot of time to meet new people. Hey, coffee places are great to meet new people with similar interests. Why don't I go there? Or even after workouts, I just want to sit in a place where I can lounge for a bit and then go back home. I could hire a coffee shop for that place, right? So all of these circumstances versus what I really need to get done, you start seeing patterns emerge once you talk to a bunch of people, right? So you create the same spreadsheet for 15, 20, 25, how many people that you can talk to. And once you start doing that, you start seeing patterns that you can see on the left of the screen, on the right of the screen, right? You get to see, you start seeing patterns starts emerging. And from these patterns come certain features, right? Saying that, coffee paces, a lot of people 18 25 that have spoken come there, which means that they might need Wi-Fi access and they would not mind paying extra money for on the over on top of the bill to pay for Wi-Fi, right? So you've got a bunch of these things coming there, and now once you've got all of these things coming up, you can actually compare these competition, the features, anything else to your competition. You can figure out, if the set of people that I've spoken to want this, desire this, in these certain scenarios, what are the top 5 competitors that are the closest replacements right now? Because you have to remember one thing, that there's a switching cost to everything, right? If the switching cost isn't too much, then I could just not come to your cafe at all. Then your entire exercise of building a cafe, of setting up Wi-Fi and this and that, could really just go to the waste. So product market fit is something that you arrive at. It's not something that you have a preconceived notion of. You just sort of arrive at based on the set of users that you start talking to and interviewing all these things, right? So that's essentially how you sort of start doing it. Now the second part is, right, when you want to start really generating MK words, and when you really want to start generating businesses, right? So oftentimes what happens is that I've from what I've seen is that a lot of founders have very simple websites that don't really do a good job of either selling the value proposition or even attracting leads for, let's say, a demo or anything else. So you could sort of leverage the basic framework that I've put across on the left side of the screen, which is you can have a start trial or a freemium thing, sort of, if you're doing a B2C product and growth sort of a product. And then you can have a community if you're trying to just sort of trying to get into the community aspect of things. Or you could have a live chat if you're trying to answer some FAQs for B2B founders. So you could have a bunch of these things laid out, which all lead to your CRM and your marketing automation and a bunch of those things. And also you can have Google Analytics and all this. When you have this one-to-one funnel setup, you kind of get a fair idea of where people are coming from and how they're coming from and what they're really looking for, what they're clicking at, etc. Right? Now, how do these essentially tie to numbers? Right? It's very easy to sort of, it could seem almost no-brainer to set these things up, but then what happens is that you always have to figure out how you're going to tie these back to sales numbers, right? So if you look at to the right of my screen, right? Let's say this year you're trying to close $1 million worth in sale, and your average selling price for, let's say, your product or one deal is $100,000. You need 10 deals that year. But if you're trying to close the same amount, which is $1 million at an average selling price of $25,000, you need 40 deals a year, and the math is very, very different, right? So if you focus on this part of the screen, especially, right? Let's say that you are trying to, you figure out a list of people that you can contact with. You've got a basic landing page setup. You've got all the basic stuff set up, right? Now, your math could be, I need to reach to 1,000 people out there, out of which I need at least 20 of them to give me positive responses, which is either, let's say I'm ready to get on a call with you, or why don't you send me some of the collateral? Can I review it? It could be positive reply, could be something of, to that effect, right? And then from that, you want 14 people to actually come to your discovery and demos. And believe me, there will always be no shows, but take conservative number of 10 or 14, which is 50-60% of it. And then you can sort of go in with your math, right? And then technical deep dive meetings. I've liked what you show me. I like what your proposition is. Why don't you, give me a PSU? Why don't you give me a couple of free licenses? Or why don't you just take me through every technicality of the product? Show me your information architecture. Show me how it embeds into my systems. All of those things, right? And then when you send your proposal, and then you've got your new business close to one, right? So you always have to start with the right side of things, which is figuring out your math, right? What's your average selling price compared to your competition? Is it higher or is it lower? Other than that, how many sales are you trying to achieve this year? What's your numbers every quarter? How many numbers are you supposed to hit every week, right? Then you figure out your account list. I've got my math. These are the set of 3,000, 4,000 people that I can contact with and all of those things. The other thing that I can do is I can also do a bit of account map. Let's say I've got already set of people, but it's not always going to happen that these same set of people will respond to you. Sometimes they could have forwarding stuff that could go to their assistants or to somebody else on their board. So you always have to get a good sense of how many people are really involved in this team. Who's the one who's going to be signing on the check or not actually. So in account-based marketing, we've got something called BANT, which is budget, authority, need, right? So when you have, or BANT is just one of the ways that you could do this. You could do it in a bunch of ways. Either way, you just have to keep basic thumb rules in mind. Am I talking to the right person? Is this person going to sign the check or not? And that's about it. As long as you've got these two very baseline items sorted out there, I think you're good for the most part. So once you've done account mapping, right, and the way that you can actually go about doing this is that every company out there, regardless if it's B2B or B2C, has their annual reports and strategic reports coming out probably during the end of March, April, or around Jan and everything else, right? So in that, once you start reviewing that, you get to know what the strategic goals are of that company every year, or where the industry's headed, or where they think the industry's headed. So you can pick up social cues from there to sort of fine tune your messaging better and reach out, the right people, better, right? So you can do that either via cold routing, which is your cold emails, cold calls, or you could just display ads, whatever works for you, right? So in terms of math, right now, for example, just sort of extending everything that we've spoken earlier, right? So you've got your annual target, let's say $1 million, right? And your average sales price is $50,000. Your revenue target per quarter, let me do 250K, right? And then so when you set out this math, right, which is per quarter, per month, everything else, you get some basic North Star guidelines that you can sort of just start aiming at. Now, what you can do is you can divide that into all the way right from the discovery meetings, all the way to technical POCs, all the way to proposals. If you just do a basic funnel math like this, I think that clears up for the most part. And you don't really have to be very accurate with this at the start. Even if you can see some numbers in front of you with some basic, even if, for example, these conversion rates right here, they're just blind guesses that you think based on your confidence level of selling your solution or anything. No matter even if that's there, that's still good enough for you to sort of start your process with, right? So the essential idea is to just have your basic math laid out and to just start with things. Now next comes, how do you increase your product-led growth, or how do you increase your top of the funnel, right? So you've got ads, you can create content, you can create a bunch of webinar content, you can do all of those things. But regardless of that, in very, very specific use cases, it becomes very hard to quantify what exactly product-led growth means, right? Especially if you're in the B2C scenario more than B2B, because B2B, in most cases, your average contract values are higher. And so it's not too difficult for you guys to reach out to the right people and then have the conversations going, because in the B2B side of things, your conversations, your deal closures happen once every 6 months. In B2C, it's purely based on network effects. So the value of your product or service, the value of that only increases if more and more people use it, right? So it's very linear and correlated that way. So if I were to take an example of Vymo, right, where I work at, one of the things that we noticed was that a lot of our inside sales people kept giving demos, product marketers were involved, everyone involved kept giving demos, but none of the demos really had that stickiness in them. So people saw it, nobody got really excited about it. So the only other sensible thing that we could do to sort of ensure that we had the most highest intent leads coming in there, so that anybody that we landed spending time with in a demo or in anything else, we knew for a fact that at least this guy's 60% inclined to close. So we just wanted that sort of filtering to be done there, right? So something as simple as creating a very contextual product tour, right? For example, if you look at the left of the screen, what we've done is that because in strategic or in business meetings, nobody's going to really care about your features. Nobody's going to really ask you, what have you got this feature? Have you got that feature? People are going to ask you more um, top level question, which is that, what can your solution, can your app help me, generate 5,000 leads in a month? Can your app help me train and onboard people better, right? It's going to keep asking, people are going to keep asking all those things about your app or solution, right? So if you design workflows, if you design collateral or document or anything of that sort, that sort of encapsulates a certain flow to achieve a certain goal, right? Dialing back to everything that we'd spoken earlier, that will make for a very good way to sort of make sure that your conversions at the top of the funnel from to the bottom of the funnel increases a lot, right? But if I would take the example of Netlify, right? Netlify, I'm sure all of you guys have heard of it. It's a place where you can sort of build websites, and it's got a headless technology that's being implemented on it. But coming to the point, which is, how did Netlify sort of reach the stage that it is in by just being a simple website building service and a hosting service and all that, right? If you're in the B2B space, everything is sort of anchored around the pricing of it, right? It doesn't matter as much about what features you have. It matters how quickly can you take people from the starter to the enterprise level as soon as possible, or from your lowest plan to the highest plan. And the way that you can do about this is that you can either have complete self-serve, which is that people can onboard themselves, people can have access to great documentation that they can sort of learn from and understand your product by themselves. People can reach out to your support team pretty easily. All of these little aspects that sort of make a very cohesive experience. And if you just keep giving people, for example, if you can give them credits for trying out every feature of your product, right? Using a product or software or something like that, right? That makes it a very holistic and a wholesome way for them to really explore and understand your product as well. And the business outcome of that is that they could probably discover features that they probably haven't heard of before in your product. They could really convert very easily as well, right? So that's one of the ways that you can actually go about doing with Netlify, right? Or with any B2C game that you're essentially in. So when it comes to helping BDRs and sales enablement, right? There are two ways that you can approach about this. One, you can either just work with them for every ongoing deal that's happening, and you can sort of build collateral that's relevant to a certain deal and just help mobilize. Or you can sort of create something called a GTM kit, right? Which is basically your use cases, your features, your battle cards, your case studies, demos, everything out there basically, right? You just create a repository of all the content right there. So the content could be various formats, right? It could be battle cards, it could be across your verticals, across markets. It could be anything and anything that's relevant to your business, right? So, but you create a very specific kit for every feature, for every workflow, for every use case that you have, for every industry that you have, in a way, so that you can sort of start empowering your sales and inside sales and pre-sales and anybody essentially in the company to sort of start leveraging these documents. Because once they start taking these documents to market, once they start showing their customers, who you are, what you're trying to do, and all those things, that will sort of slowly start breaking the gap between what you're trying to say and what you're trying to become, right? So that's a good way of actually doing it. But you also have to sort of actively spend time training your sales teams or anybody who's on the commercial side of business to actively say exactly what's there in the document. Otherwise, it's sort of pointless that you create any of these documents, right? Because you've always got to, if I'm defining something as an assistant, then it needs to be said an assistant, not an AI ML thing, right? So that's only one that you need to try and remember. So if I would try and quantify what GTM essentially is, right? So GTM, like I mentioned earlier when we started as well, that GTM is a very nuanced thing to explain. One of the reasons because we seldom own direct revenue. I mean, of course, we are as a function responsible for upsells and cross sells, but for the most part, we are enablers, right? We sort of sit centrally within the company and that sort of tries to enable marketing, product partnerships, everybody else out there, right? Because we are the ones who set the messaging and the positioning and the context of the product and the company itself, right? So if I were to bring four levers, right, in terms of the four metrics that GTM sort of tracks actively, which is time to market. How quickly am I able to sort my market research out? How quickly can I build out my GTM kits? How quickly can I ensure that there are joint ventures happening where we're probably doing a joint webinar or joint roundtable to get more leads, that we can sort of jointly attack together? Or how many POCs are happening? How many demos have I templatized? So all of this time to market or the agility related stuff is what something that we also track, right? The second part is de-risking critical deals. This is something that deals majorly creating content for bottom of the funnel, which is case studies, white papers, etc. So what happens oftentimes, even if your credibility and everything else is set, people are still trying to understand what have you done for somebody else that's actually made them successful. So I can go ahead and buy your product or service at whatever price it is selling. So creating stuff like that, creating collateral that will sort of attune to that particular situation is also something that we help with. Generate net new revenue. This is basically figuring out new markets. You know what? If there's a certain new market you're trying to figure, then everything that I mentioned earlier as well, like using Zoom Info, using LinkedIn Sales Navigator, using all these things, or probably even attending events. These are great places to sort of start attending, start picking out which markets and which customers and which people that you can start talking to, right? So that's one of the things we also look after. Cross sells, upsells, ensuring that your cost to deliver new POCs are much lesser, etc. Then you're building your case for ownership or building a credible case for your organization, which is ensuring that you've got competition battle cards set out. Because see, battle cards is more of an apples to orange approaches, in the sense that you're also right, so is your so is your competition, right? It's not that you're better than them or they're better than you. They just apply in very different contexts, which is why earlier in the presentation as well, I showed you the jobs to be done market map sort of thing. That is important because that sort of helps establish the thin line in sand between who you're right for and who your competition is right for, right? And so both of these things is something that you have to be sort of be very honest about, because then you can sort of say no to the customers who or the inbounds that sort of come to you. Because if you say yes to everyone, you will not really land up building a great case study or a great portfolio for yourself. Because whenever you're saying yes to any deal or whenever you're trying to do anything, it's also very important to remember that you also have to be successful in that deployment as much as your customer, as much as anybody else. So one of the ways to do it is just go to your customer's page, see the stuff that they're trying to do, see who they're trying to do it for, and see at what pricing that they're opting for. If you have all, because see, ultimately people pick any solution or any product for three things, right? Save me time, save me money, or save me the effort. So if you and not everyone does everything, right? Some people just do one or three, the others do three or three. So you also have to justify that as well. So once you do that, you can create very honest and very holistic battle cards. Then comes something called GTM motions. In the sense, now that we've spoken about the ways of how you can tactically approach GTM and what GTM essentially is, let's talk about how you can start your GTM journey, right? And a couple of ways that you can do it, right? If you're trying to do bottom-up selling, you can either start, let's say if you've got a freemium product, or if you've got a product that is more consumer-oriented, then you can start reaching out to ICs and companies, or they're basically employees or freelancers. So anybody trying to do individuals, basically, right? You reach out to them, you build enough of a cult following for yourself, or enough of a credible thing for yourself, which could be reviews on Capterra, G2 Crowd, just enough to convince the directors and their level one managers to sort of buy a product, right? To make it like the thing in the company, right? Like how Slack became or Teams became the standard in most companies, right? So that's one way that you can do it. The second comes your middle out, wherein you could be selling a B2B or B2B C product, any of those things, but you're essentially trying to reach out to directors, and then you're either spreading out to the C-suite or to the IC, depending on the kind of product or service that you're trying to sell. Then comes your top down, which is basically traditional sales, which is where you reach out to senior stakeholders from companies, and you know that if this is a product or service that needs to be mandated across the organization, and deals with larger and more complex database and more securities involved, and probably where the average deal size could be upwards of $1 million or something, then top down sales is something you should start approaching, right? But one thing to remember is that it's often confusing whether you need to be sales led or product led, right? And there's a very simple mental model to it, right? On the y-axis, you can just list out what your average selling price is, right? It could be $20, it could be $100,000, it could be anything. You just list it out. And on your x-axis, you can put all the steps that a user or a buyer sort of needs to complete in order to sort of, keep is increasing from let's say $20 today to your high spend, whatever that's available, right? The amount of steps that's involved will sort of give you a hint of at which uh, it'll basically help you understand if the entire thing could basically be automated, or the entire thing could just basically be completely self-serve by themselves, where people can pay for the product by themselves on the website. They can start using it. They can reach out and support themselves. They can configure themselves. They can probably download stuff from the marketplace or from some other marketplace to integrate things. And they basically do not need that much support from the company, right? So that will sort of help you understand how much of it can be automated and how much of it can't be. And so when you arrive at that juncture, which is when you figure out, what, I should start repackaging my solution to sort of start becoming more sales and start going for bigger deals, right? So this is one heuristic that you can sort of start applying. It's not the only way, but it's something that I've frequently used myself. So this all to come to a conclusion with what bottoms up or the various kinds of GTMs are, right? So if you look at bottom up, which is could be open source software, could be stuff like something like a DevOps software that could be used for monitoring or all of these things, right? So stuff like that which totally carry inherently a very high ticket value. That could be classified as a bottom-up GTM, wherein you basically are trying to just tap on the network effects, which is you do enough marketing, you do enough word of mouth in communities or in ads or anything like that, and where people sort of try out your product and they like it, they just pay using credit card and just buy your product, right? And so the average contract value could be from $10 all the way up to $20,000, right? But the difference is that you will have a larger customer base here, and your entire existence sort of lies on how big your customer base essentially is, right? So the go-to-market approach could be something as simple as, like I said, right, becoming a thought leader in the industry, connecting with enough people out there, enough end users, essentially having the network effects going, word of mouth, referrals, all of these things. Right? So once you do that, give enough people access to your freemium product and be generous with it because you're trying to get your early adopters. Once you do that, have your self-serve to keep increasing your average contract value every now and then, right? There could be a bunch of ways that you could do this, but figure out what's relevant to your business. Yeah. So, and then you've got your middle out, which is, I would say it's slightly more complex or slightly more nuanced in the sense that everyone's involved here equally, right? Your product, your sales, your marketing, your CSMs. But then you sort of need to start hiring your product team first to build out a great product, because the product is going to do most of the selling. At least it's going to be the foot in the door for you. The salespeople and their Rolodex or their relationships will not be the foot in the door for you. Your product will be the foot in the door. So the way that I would do is I would probably just close my 5 to 10 accounts first and then get CSMs to just drive the relationships further, right? It's like probably selling a printer or something, right? The product is great. I sell the printer out to whoever's important, and I let my CSM or my sales guy just handle a relationship right after that, right? So that's one way to do it. Top down is pure sales ed, wherein you want to be hiring people with connects and relationships existing in the industry, and you want to leverage that to get access to your direct customers. So this is high ticket sales because you're spending like a lot of money to get a lot of money in the end, but also remember that your sales cycles will be super, super long. So higher the average contract value, bigger the sales cycle, right? So that's essentially how it happens. Coming towards the last part of my presentation, which is how do you build a deck, right? Which is one of the most important things that exists in the realm of GTM, right? So one of the things, whether you're a B2C or a B2B company, what makes a difference is that how you define your initial hypothesis. Because let's say you do your research in McKinsey, you read a bunch of papers, or you see social media and you figure out, what, this is what's happening in the industry, these are your trends. There could be many narratives that could really exist, and all these narratives could be equally true and could be equally false. So there's a 50% probability of all that happening. But what sticks to you is what's closest to your product. If your product does X, Y, Z, then the trends that complete that story will be the trend that you really need to start writing upon, right? So you generate your initial hypothesis, right? So your first 3 to 4 slides of the presentation will be a broad problem statement, your industry trends, and your solution statement, in the sense that, these are the 5 things that's happening in the industry today. These are the 5 things that could happen to make sure that the existing companies are staying ahead of this game. The only way that they can do this is by, leveraging these 5 levers that are out there, and this is what my product does to enable the 5 functions. Probably could be debottlenecking something, or increasing revenues, or increasing productivity of your employer. It could be any of these metrics that my product essentially moves to help to make sure that they achieve their quota or their goals, right? So you also have to craft a story that way. You have to bring out your trends and your key enablers for your target ICP, and then just put in your solution right there and see how well that fits, right? Doing this, especially if you do this from sites like McKinsey or Gartner and all these things for your industry, what it helps you is that it helps you pick up some industry jargon that you probably would not have known before. But if you do that exercise coupled with the exercise of actually talking to your end consumers by just buying them a beer or just making coffee shop and just doing that market math exercise, you also get to know what those jargons essentially really mean, right? Because they might be one thing, could be something else out there. So you just have to get a sense of how people communicate with each other in the industry. I think that's super important, because if people aren't able to understand your solution, talk to their peers in the language that they understand with each other, everything's going to get lost in translation, right? So that's one of the things that I would do to build the first 3 to 4 slides of the presentation. Then there could be various ways in which your product or your solution could solve a certain problem, right? And the way that you go about is by doing something called the issue tree. In the sense that, if you try to increase widget sales, there are 3 ways that your product could do it. Your product helps reducing unit costs, or your product helps in improving the market strategy, or your services help to transform the sales strategy overnight. And there could be various other ways that you could solve it. In the software context, these could be your solutioning. I mean, there could be various modules, there could be various apps, or there could be various things that you could integrate with to solve a certain problem. So there could be many things that it could do. But once you've sorted out what your story is going to be, pick out the most relevant one that's relevant to you in terms of how many licenses, how many volumes that you can sell, and what price. Because at the end of the day, regardless of winning a deal or not, you're also trying to make money, or you're also trying to win the deal at a relatively larger contract value than probably your competitor or someone. And the way that you do it is figure out what is the most profitable aspect of your product. What is the part of your product or service that is fundamentally good, like that will stick, no matter how simple it is, but that's something that will work for sure, and something that can really drive business value, right? Once you figure out those things, start prioritizing it that way, right? And once you do that, you figure out, what, this is the recommendation, or this is this module, or this is the workflow that I need to start focusing on. And once you've got this hypothesis, right, remember that even if it's a deck or anything else, everything is still a hypothesis at a very early stage. So once you've got this, and once you start testing this out, again, it could be directly in sales conversations, or it could be directly in in this market mapping exercise that you have with the customers who understand their jobs and why they would need a solution like yours. Remember that everything is a work in progress. And so whatever that you're building, it's just a good way to just vet the stickiness of it, right? And you sort of improve over this over a period of time. But essentially, this is a rough blueprint or a rough mental model that I've sort of always leveraged to, build my decks and presentations. But yeah, this is sort of it. This is pretty much what GTM is, and how you could sort of, think of GTM as being a central function to a lot of things. So I'm, open to questions. If you've got any questions, feel free to shoot them at me right now. Hey, Bhagdas, are you with me?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah. Hi. This is Deepthi.
Hey, Niti.
Hi. So Varun, I have 2 questions. Okay. One, I come from a B2B background, and we have a product already. Okay. So go-to-market is already done, but now it's to expand it. Okay. So 2 questions here. One, when we are a B2B, when we are an early stage company, which is bootstrapped, okay, which is not funded, funds are always in crunch, and you have to see where you have to put in the money, right? So in terms of marketing, there is always a confusion. Okay, you want to put money on database, you want to put money on Google Ads, you want to put money here, there, SEO, 10 different things. How do you decide, okay, where to put the money? Okay, that's one. And where to put more money. Okay. That's the first question that I have. If you can answer that. And second question, as an entrepreneur, while you do not come, sorry, go ahead.
No, please tell me. I'll listen to both and I'll answer.
Okay, so the second question is that as an entrepreneur, of course, you do not have all the skills, and I come from an operations background, so I'm not, a sales. I have not been a salesperson, but now getting into the sales role. Okay, so
Right.
the idea is to understand more and more how you can improve your closures, right? So, are there kinds of trainings, or where would one go so that you keep on improving yourself?
Right. Very fair questions. In fact, this is a question I think no matter how many times you play the same game, you can't always have the right answers to it because this is subjective. Now, for example, if you're running a bootstrap setup, like how Deepthi is, I'm sure a lot of you guys also could be in the same place and everything else. The bootstrap can be tricky because you don't exactly know what to prioritize your spending on. Like Deepthi mentioned, it could be ads, it could be anything else. But if you start doing ads, then there's always somebody else who could outbid you with more money and more resources. So that does not seem like the right way to do it. One of the ways, the way that I function and the way that I've seen people function is using a simple Trello board. In the sense, you've always got some deals or something in the pipeline. Now, if you look at it as a simple pipeline, right, where at the end of it, you've got your deal closures happening, at the start of it, you've got your conversations happening, your initial conversations happening. Just make sure that you invest all your resources and all your money on increasing the meetings that are right here, which means that could be improving your email marketing strategy or improving your databases, right? Probably getting a better subscription to a better tool or figuring out how you can prospect better and stuff like that. So you have to invest there. So you have more meetings and demos happening. And once you have more meetings and demos happening, your conversion will naturally increase. So your bottom line across the board will increase. Today, if you're closing 10 lakh rupees worth of sales in a year, then because of you investing all your time and energy in sort of having more meetings and then creating stickiness across the place, which is your product marketing function basically comes here right here in between. Once you start doing that, then automatically everything else will start improving. So that is one of the most first principles based approach that you can do it, because I mean, see, at the very outset, always have a great website, always have a great branding, always have great all of it in terms of aesthetics, in terms of look and feel and general vibe of it, because that makes the initial perception of it. So I would put a good chunk of my money in terms of getting that branding and getting my website and all that sorted, right? Getting the experience sorted. The second thing that I would do is I would invest in a pretty good database, and I would probably just get one person whose only job is to validate that database, validate it across markets, using LinkedIn Sales Navigator, using a bunch of tools, and to start segmenting the list and to just run an email campaign, a cold outreach email campaign. That's about it, to make sure that he gets meetings from senior stakeholders. Now, once that's there, it's up to me to set up meetings with them, and then I will start creating decks, documents, anything that is needed to, probably set up a demo with them, probably send them a gift if I need to, send them anything else that could just move things faster for me, right? So that's where I would put most of my money. So in the second one, Deepthi, that you answered, there's no particular place that you can sort of start going to get playbook driven knowledge. You can leverage most of the stuff that's already there online on Twitter and here and there, but beyond the point, look, what happens that you could get lost. You could get information paralysis. You get exposed to too much information, too many ways of doing it right, and then eventually not doing anything right. So the way that, as an entrepreneur, one of the biggest things that I think one of the greatest things that you can do, and I speak from my own experience when I say this, is to follow your gut instinct. If your gut instinct, because everything else comes down to basic math, comes down to basic, the way that we run our households or the way that we run our own budgets every month, right? It's cost cutting, cost saving, figuring out ways to side hustle or to make new streams of income, figuring out ways to make yourself known in the society, all of those things. It's very simple, right? It's very, very simple that way. If that answers your question, let me know. Otherwise, I could also discuss and brainstorm with you. But trying to give you as simple and actionable advice that I can.
Yeah, thanks. This answers the question. So a lot of confusion because you speak to 10 different people and they have 10 different answers
Exactly.
to this.
I'm telling you, just
Right.
don't.
So
The first thing,
yeah.
the best thing that I did in my own life was to stop listening to people. I cannot stress this enough, because everything in life is very deductive. Like, if you've learned how to walk or if you've learned how to build a company today, everything has been by asking a couple of people, setting up a couple of pieces together, like, putting this piece together, putting this piece together, putting a bunch of these pieces together, and then you figure out if this model of yours works or not, right? It's like how we did science experiments in school. Even though all of us knew how to make a volcano, or every one of us knew how to make a magnetic thing or something, we all still had our own models of it and we all kept testing it out. So a business is very much like that. What you can do is, and see, the best thing that I would rather say, right, instead of asking people, and something that I've been experimenting of late, it's a wild experiment and you can't quote me on this. But the easiest way to do it instead of listening to people is that listen to businesses. Because if you're trying to do lead gen, right, figure out what the best 10 lead gen tools are. You can just Google that and find out. All of these 10 companies will have great case studies, will have great everything else out there, right? And then you can go read up the case studies. You can figure out how they are essentially doing their sales or how did this tool enable them. And if this solves your problem, or if you think that something similar could work for you, then you can reach out for a free trial. Then you can see if that works. You can do hit or miss like that, right? But every company, every competitor, everyone has one of their own ways of doing this. There is something called Built With, and I'll just put that right here in the chat. Not sure if you guys have heard of it. Let me just type it out. You can Google this. So essentially, Built With is a paid SaaS tool wherein you can sort of find what tools and stuff your competitors are using and all these things. I'm not sure how accurate it is. I've never really used it myself, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. But I would sort of take the more traditional approach wherein I'd go to a G2 Crowd or I'd go to a Capter, I'd go to these places, I'd figure out the best tools that are there that could solve my particular problem, read about it, read if that tool requires people to operate that certain product or not, or if you need somebody like a dedicated guy to handle your CRM or not. Otherwise, nahi. Otherwise, most of the things can be done on Notion itself. You spend a weekend learning Notion formulas or databases. You can build a CRM on Notion. You can automate a lot of things for free on Notion itself. So I myself have used a Trello board to run my business for the longest time. I'd never invested in a CRM or I'd never invested in any of those things, because you also have to realize that the scale at whatever the scale that you're operating, you also have to realize that a lot of tools and a lot of things could spoil the dinner completely. So keep it as simple and as direct as possible, because at the end of the day, you're just trying to do dhanda, you're trying to do business. So money in, money out. Keep that math straight.
Right. Thanks, Varun.
Yep.
Really helpful.
Any other questions?
Yes, I would like to address all the participants to come forward and have interaction with Varun. Clear your doubt without any hesitations.
Yeah, feel free, guys. There's no time limit or anything. I'm happy to talk to everyone. Yeah.
Hey Varun, I have a quick question. So my product is something like $50.
Hey, what's your name? I'm sorry.
Hey, this is Ashwin.
Ashwin. Okay, hi.
Yeah, hi Varun. So I'm co-founder of Disbug. So my product is pricing ranges somewhere between like $30 per month to $100 per month. So how do I go from? So I have like first 10 customers from Product Hunt Launch. And Reddit Hacker News. So how do I go from like 10 to 100? What should be my priorities? So where should we reach out?
Who does? Okay, these 10 people that are they paid users? Have they converted to being a paid?
Paid users. So we have around 300 signups. Out of that, 10 are paid users.
Okay, so 300 of them signed up and only 10 of them converted. So I think that's a pretty low conversion. So who are these? Who are the end users? Are they software developers? Who exactly are they? Can you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, they are. So we target a software development team. So our product is essentially a bug reporting tool, and we target software developers and QA testers.
Got it. So one easy way where, something that I've actually heard that it actually works is that look, communities can be a little harder thing to do because you have to go there, network, spend time, do this, do that. So it's a little bit of a effort. The other aspect of what works for B2C companies like yours is Google ads and all these things. But even then, when you start investing in ads, Google or Facebook, anything else, the numbers are out of the chart. Like they're too expensive. The sweet spot is that if you go to Reddit, because you said that you're on Reddit, you're on Product Hunt and on Twitter, which I'm assuming, a lot of these people might have because Substack is one place where people have built amazing gated communities for themselves, and there are a lot of places where they might have a lot of software development newsletters and things that are around the peripheral of what you do, or could be speaking to the audience that are relevant to your business, right? Make a list of, let's say, 5 or even 10 to start with, right? To be honest, just make a list of 10 newsletters, good newsletters that you can start with. Like, for example, I remember there was this guy, I'm going to put this in the chat. there's a thing called Pete Codes. You can Google this guy. He's on Twitter as well. So this guy used to run a newsletter, I think, for all software developers, I think, also people who essentially learning to code and this and that, and a bunch of these little things, right? So figure out people like this, and then you can start buying ad spaces in them. So if you buy ad spaces, right? So let's say if you're spending $100 to buy one ad space to talk about your product, to offer them a free trial or anything like that, you're talking to at least 5,000 targeted people. You're talking to at least 5,000 targeted people that you can, sort of get to your landing page. You can ask them for an NPS. You can ask them, what do you like about my product? What you didn't like about my product? You can offer to come for a free call with all of them. You can get as creative as you can, provided you're in front of the right people. So if you go for the product hunt launch, or you go just random community hunting and all these things, that's too much effort, boss. That is too much effort. And as an entrepreneur, I think where you always have to strike a balance between effort and the money that you spend in all of those things, right? So in these cases, your efforts are high leverage efforts, because you find 10 newsletters, because you know that newsletters is something that is being consumed crazy left, right, center. And on newsletters, the benefit is that you can also track clicks, you can track all of this things, because the one who's selling with the ad space will be liable to give you all that data himself. So when he does that, you can run a certain special campaign for it, for Holi or for New Year's or whatever it is. You figure that out. That's your thing. But when you put out your product in front of those people, it's a lot easier for them to convert, because you'll be talking to at least an access to 5,000 developers or 1,000 developers. You can try with smaller audiences if you want to see how it works for yourself. But that's one good pace. The second pace, what I would do is I would connect one-on-one with developers from GitHub, because GitHub is one place where a lot of people do a lot of open source contributions, and everyone's all on this, experimenting and tinkering with new tools and stuff. So I'd probably go out and just build relationship with them, just so that they can talk about your product and stuff on their social channels, and they could just probably spread the word out of goodwill or anything in their circles. But then doing that, let's say if you've got an open source aspect of your product, or if you'd want people who can just actively contribute to it or talk about it in various communities that they are part of, for example, like dev.to and a lot of these places, then you can just reach out to the right people from GitHub and just build relationships. But always narrow down the right places, basically, and then you'll have the right people in front of you. So there's no point shouting in the middle of the road. Just go to a place where it's relevant and then talk, right? If that makes sense.
Understood. Yeah. Thank you, Varun.
For sure.
Anyone is having any other questions? Okay, we'll wait for 10 seconds more, and then we will carry forward this session.
I did get one, someone on chat, someone called PP who sent a direct message. I think PP, whoever you are, with your permission, I'm just going to read things out. So if your average contract value is greater than $20,000, will having a public pricing page help? I see most companies selling greater than, fair. Actually, pricing is not something a lot of people talk about after a certain threshold. And it makes sense to not publish your pricing pages. You can always direct them to your sales teams, because if you're trying to sell anything that has an average contract value of more than $20,000, you're dealing with a lot of databases, you're dealing with a lot of complex security norms. You could be, embedding with a much larger, internal system that they could have. So it makes total sense to not reveal anything at all, right? So that's fair. The other thing that you would ask is that, is gated content, white paper, case studies still relevant, or should they just be made public? They are insanely relevant, more relevant than ever, because one of the reasons there's something called analyst reports, in the sense a lot of companies actually pay analysts from Gartner and all these places $100K, $200K a year, so that they could get mentioned in their reports, primarily because during this year when budgets are being allocated right now, in most countries, people actually go straight to Gartner, straight to something like that, to actually figure out, what are the best tools that they can use. So let's say if you're building a white paper with a much credible institution, it will go to the right senior stakeholders. And if you talk to anybody C-suite and above, they do read white papers. And in terms of case studies, regardless of whether you are in B2B, B2C, case studies take one way or another. For example, the B2C context, your case studies could be integrating with a tool that shows when was your last sign up coming on your website, right? So something to do with social proof. But on the B2B side, then having case studies, the more cohesive it is, just to show that, it was a client's initiative, it was the client's idea, the client that was trying to be successful, and you were just being the enabler of it. You're putting out every little detail out there, right? You don't have to make it a 50-page case study, but a 10-page great case study, and doing a PR on it, a press release on it, just seals the deal for you. Because every time a case study is out and you do a press release on it, it will get the right eyeball. So it's very, very important that you have case studies right from day zero, by the way. Yeah, so Naratambi, Mr. Has asked another question. Can we have a different um, can we have different price for same software SaaS product for different countries, India and overseas? Um, I would not recommend this because you have to go back to first principles, right? Because um, your see, there is something called willingness to pay. How much, for example, in India, regardless of what my income band is, I would still not mind paying 40, 50 lakhs for a BMW. In the US, for me, 40, 50 lakhs or, BMW is a much, cheaper commodity there because their average incomes are higher. But their willingness to pay for a BMW might not be as much as their willingness to pay would be for a Tesla, because, the sex appeal really does matter. So your product or your pricing, essentially, it's a good determinant of, the entire sex appeal of your product or your business, right? So Tesla is a much sexier product in the US market, and people, it's all in the hype. Everyone's talking about it. Of course, Tesla, people will pay 3x the amount of a BMW. Even Tesla might not be the most tested or the most resilient product out there, but people still pay, right? So you have to figure out what your initial perception is in the market, because your perception of the value or where you're uniquely positioned will sort of help figure out, what is this person's software really worth $500 a month, or is it just worth $100 a month, right? You need to sort of get a sense of that first. The second thing is that because let's say if you're trying to do it overseas and you're trying to settle large enterprises, then you're going to be involved in a lot of data centers. Like, you'd want to be deploying on their local data centers. A lot of compliance norms, everything will be there. So of course that'll reflect in your pricing as well too. So I would sort of recommend that you sort of factor all of these things as well, and then figure out what works best for you. But I would say definitely have a good delta between what you're charging here locally and what you're charging abroad. Yeah. So any other questions? I hope that answers your question. Feel free to ask, counter it if you've got any other ideas. For pricing, I would recommend there's this one book called the where I think it's called The Pricing of the Confession Man or something. Yeah, Confessions of the Pricing Man. And then there is one other book actually. There are a lot of such books that give you pretty clear mental models on how you can sort of go about pricing this stuff. Let me just open my Notion. I'll quickly tell you the name of the other book. I sort of had notes of it as well. That was, I think, published somewhere. Let me just bump that up right here actually in front of everyone. Wait, okay. Let me share my screen. Yeah, I'm hoping everyone can see my screen. So you can try out this book. In fact, I recommend everyone just reading this book called Monetizing Innovation: How Smart Companies Design the Product Around the Price. This was a pretty solid book. I would suggest primarily around GTM and pricing and stuff. And then I would recommend The Sacred Lives of Customers by David Scott Duncan. In fact, the spreadsheet that you saw, the market map, was basically taken from this book. And so it's a tried and tested model, works great. If you're trying to sort of deep dive into strategy a bit, then I'd recommend this book called Playing to Win by A.G. Lafley. This is a pretty solid book. It's a very top of the level book, but it helps you sort of understand what strategy is at a very high level and what it isn't. And it's a good thing that you can sort of do. When you're sort of creating your packages, when you're trying to package a solution better, you can check out this book called Unlocking the Customer Value Chain. Essentially, remember that I spoke about saving time, money, and effort and stuff. This is a book that sort of exemplifies that just better. And if you guys want to figure out how do you build a business case, how do you do things on that level, then Case in Point, which is a standard book with MBAs in the law business schools, that's something I'd highly recommend. Company of One is also a good book if you're trying to run a solo startup or with probably one or two people and you just want to stay that small and nimble. Company of One is a great book that, so Paul Jarvis is the CEO of Fathom that basically competes with Google Analytics. In fact, has beaten Google Index as well. I can share the list of books. Let me just give you this link actually. And okay. So I've just pasted the link of that on the chat. So I haven't been updating this for quite some time. Wait, let me just share this with everyone also in the chat. I think it's just gone to one person. Everyone in the meeting. Yeah. So you can refer this Notion list on my in the chat right there. So there, all the books, I've already taken summaries of a lot of them, and I've also created various views in terms of by strategy, by career, by etc. So you can skim through whatever that's there. But so these books aren't the kind of books that you just read and forget. You definitely create mental models and implement one of the things out of them. The other thing, sort of one last thing I want to sort of bump up is this person called Paras Chopra who has written a great just one second. Paras Chopra, yeah, who's just I think authored a book in public itself right now, purely around competition and all of those things, right? So let me just bump up that link as well too for everyone's benefit. Definitely, for sure, check that out. I think because if you check that out, I think it'll answer a lot of your questions purely around the competition and the market analysis bit. I'm just trying to find that link out, and I'll just share that in a bit. Mental models, yeah, mental model for startups. I'm just sharing this link again in the chat. Let's see if it's useful. Yeah, I've just shared it. Inward Passion free book, Mental Models for Startup Founders. I highly recommend that. But yeah, if anyone wants to reach out to me offline, feel free to do so. No constraints on that front. If there are any other questions, cool. Otherwise, I think we can wrap, Bhaktasi.
Yes, definitely. So from the participant side, anyone would like to ask anything? Okay, so I'm taking a note as we will be later on get connected with you, Varun.
Yeah.
I will share your contact details over here so participants can get connected with you one-on-one and have interaction with you without any hesitations and for any sort of further details.
For sure.
Right? Also, I would like to address everyone over here from the participant side to fill the pitch deck Google form to submit your pitch deck to getting reviewed for the first review session, right? Just a sec. Consider the chat box and have the link over there. I have also shared the same link on a WhatsApp group as well. Don't forget to fill this form before Monday, right? Okay, so thank you so much, Varun, for having such a
Great being here.
wonderful session with us, right? Yeah. You have provided such an insightful and informative deck to us, and you have made this session a very interactive for all of us. So also you have provided such a handful information of what tools can be used to groom in this early stage of SaaS startups. So it's really good to see that we actually had a full of house of participants who have registered for the program and actually who haven't, but from other
That's amazing.
handles they have joined with us. So even this is a Saturday, right? So it's very good to see such a bunch of people over here. And thank you for sharing so valuable thoughts. On behalf of AIC Prestige and which is supported by Niti Aayog, I would like to extend, and Microsoft Software Startups as well. I would like to extend a great gesture of thank you to you, Varun, for your all support and valuable time.
Thanks a lot.
Varun, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude for all the kind of sharing that you've done. My name is Dr. Sanjeev Patni. I'm CEO of AIC Prestige Indore. I'm really impressed by the kind of knowledge share that you've done. Keen to really meet you sometimes and draw some inspiration for the kind of startups that we have, and also continuously be engaged with you to try and see when we can get you back to Indore sometimes and interact with the startups here.
Hopefully, I mean, in fact, this COVID thing has happened so out of the blue that again all of us are just back quarantined. But I think because I'm a part of a lot of communities and I keep doing this. So I've been pretty much speaking since I was, I think, 19 or something, and it's been 5 odd years since I've always been engaging with startups one way or another. In fact, someone also mentioned that they had done a product hunt launch, right? So I'd also done that. I've done everything, right from so I started my career by cold calling and So I was 19 and I was just in my engineering and I didn't know what better to do. So I'd taken a Xerox of a bunch of contacts that I'd found in some, a colleague's office, and I started cold calling and cold emailing from there, not having any tools. This is a couple of years ago. And then figuring out कि boss, ऐसे company शुरू करना पड़ता है, ऐसे नहीं करना पड़ता है.
Right.
For ₹1,000 में भी आज तुम company शुरू कर सकते हो, what not, right? All of these things, and I think that's what unites us as people. Not because we are businessmen or not because we want to start up or anything, but because in times like these, we're putting in efforts together to create something of value to someone else. And I think which is what keeps me also going. That Saturday, Sunday, koi bhi ho, call karo, we are there to help you out. So that's great.
Kind of most impressive part I noted for myself as well is that you are an avid reader, which is a very rare commodity these days. So I'm continuously going to inspire people. The kind of books those you have prescribed, I'll try and get them and try and see how I can inspire some of the other ones to read that as well.
For sure. I mean, you can see this is a small part of my collection that has been there.
Yeah.
But one of the ways that I would recommend books is because books, just don't read it, use it as a textbook, because what you have in college and schools, they are outdated stuff. But what you're doing here is somebody's life's work.
Yeah.
And they will never, no matter if people say, ki, boss, instead of reading books, let me listen to a podcast or let me watch an interview. It might work for some people, but then books are timeless wisdom. Like that wisdom, that first principles will always stick. 1 + 1 will always be 2 regardless. Remember that. So one of the things which I've also realized this year and something that I will probably start focusing on myself is that oftentimes, whether we're in startups or running business or working a job or anything, we don't give as much importance to basic economics, supply, demand, all of these things. But if you look at Uber, you look at any of these companies, they're essentially champions of supply and demand. And they've played the pricing game like nobody else. They built the entire technology around dynamic pricing. Same thing with Swiggy, same thing with Zomato. So if you understand basic concepts of economics and stuff, I think that goes a long way. I think that is something that is quite underrepresented within the startup ecosystem per se. Like because if you look at SaaS, everything that I showed you in the presentation or to everyone right here, they were pure numbers. They were pure plus minus numbers. That's it, not rocket science, nothing else. So the better you get your numbers, the better your business runs. That's something I've observed myself.
Thank you, Varun. Great. Thanks for your input. Let's be in touch, please.
Great, for sure.
Thank you for come forward. Thank you, Varun. Thank you for a wonderful session. Thank you all of you. Bye.
I'll see you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.